Hello, Jim Howard here in Fort Worth, Texas. Today's date, it is April 11th of 2023. Seems like the month's going pretty fast. I'm having trouble, I've been having trouble getting one of my prescriptions filled for a long time, and I've been without it for a long time. The last time it was filled was in November, and I've had several weird situations, pop up with them trying to get it filled, and I just had it again. I thought finally maybe I was going to get the thing filled, and I had the same on the site, their website, Walgreens. Same thing, popped up, technical error with your. So anyway, I called, and I guess I got the same thing I got in the past, which I didn't get it filled, that I needed to have the, doctor, but that I just had a prescription filled, and there was no problem with the doctor, but not this one. So I don't know what's going on. It's not a narcotic or anything like, anything like that. So I don't know what's going on there. As you can see, I mentioned it was a few days ago. I've got my $200 Dell hooked up, and I was going to install. I'm looking for the USB sticks. They're here someplace, but it's too much junk on the desk. I was going to install, Linux on it. I was thinking of Mint, then Ubuntu was recommended, the new Ubuntu. I have both of them here. I have one stick has just brand new Ubuntu on it. The other stick has, I think they said on Amazon it was like 18 Linux installs, but I think it actually is 6 or 7 different versions or whatever. But when I turned this up on, hooked it up after being off for, I don't know, a couple weeks or whatever it was off, it was just so good popping up and everything. And I thought, no, I don't want to mess with it. Just going to leave it. I've had, though, problem with the camera working over it. The one that had the Avery Media software no longer, was working. So I hooked up my, what was that one that was so, the Logitech one that has been so popular with people. Hooked it up just yesterday. Hooked it up. Hey, and it worked right. It worked right away. But I didn't. Then I had the Avery Media sitting up there, not plugged in, but just sitting up there. And so when I was moving the cables to get this out of the way, it had a cable on it then at that time. I bumped the Logitech, whatever one it was, bumped it, and then it disconnected. It didn't come out of the USB, but it disconnected. So then I went back to, nothing, now it doesn't work. I don't know what's going on with that. That's a little problem, though. I can take care of that, but let's see what's going on in the world. Oh, hub. Should have loaded up the things before, but I've got some bad pain, and so I'm not thinking too well. Thinking about the pain. Man, there's stuff going on in the world? Let's see. By the way, oh, that's what I wanted to ask somebody. I've got the modem, what is it? The AC, or the AC 1750. What was it? I just mentioned it the other day. I can't, it hurts actually to look up there and see what link. The, ouch. EP link. That's not, ouch. Ouch. That's not it. And I saw that on the back you can plug in a, you know, hard drive or whatever. So now I can't find the menu. I've got so many things on my, I have so many. Go to the start page here, you'll get a little bit of an idea. Yeah, this is like my start page, but then these are the rest of my thing. You know, I have, and I forget where I put the menu for my new router. Okay, I don't think it's in the imported bookmarks or the telephone bookmarks. Wait a minute, fast internet, is that it? No, that's speed test. Well, we'll go ahead and click on it. Since you're there, you might as well enjoy it, I guess. Oh, I still haven't returned the Verizon thing to them. I have to get out to do that. I have to take a mitts for old people and handicapped people, whatever, to get it there, I guess. Anyway, I'll probably do a search on YouTube for, because I plugged in a 1 terabyte external hard drive to it, and there was no response, but I can't find the menu to go in and see if that needs to be formatted or what. But I've got some other, you know, things I could plug in there, and that way, I guess, I could send a file to that and then move it between, you know, these computers easily or whatever. Because for some reason, I don't know, I haven't figured that out yet, but I was using, you know, a different cell phone before I got this one. And this is the Galaxy Note 10 Plus. So I'm hooked up with the same, you know, Google Fi. But as soon as I got this, I'm getting data charges. And I should be doing just strictly Wi-Fi, you know, here. No reason to be, so anyway, I didn't notice, well, I sort of noticed that the bill before this was $10 extra. I'm supposed to pay like 20 flat, basically flat rate. Well, and I guess not flat rate, because I guess they do charge, but for months I've been paying, you know, $20 a month for Google Fi, and then it was an extra $10, and I thought, well, why is that? I didn't pay any attention, and now it's gone up to an extra, what was it? Was it an extra $50, or was that the total? That'd be an extra $30. Anyway, I gotta look into that. There are so many things that I have to try to follow and take care of. So, I don't know where the router menu is. Oh, I think it's on here too, though. Maybe it'll work from here. Let's see. Walmart, Outlook, Verizon. I'll take that off when I actually return it to them, in case I need to pull something up there that they need. DoorDash, video recorder, the weather, a second weather. I think I'm paying for maybe both of those, so I need to figure out which one I need to get rid of. Phone, messages, and apps. Tether. That popped up, and I don't know why that popped up, actually. I noticed that yesterday or the day before. Let's see. Samsung Wallet. Google TV. Secure Folder, Play Store. QR code scanner. I think I might have a problem with that. I need to find a better, I think, QR code scanner. Walmart, Outlook, Google Fi. Oh, there it is. I think there it is again, my Verizon. Let me see. Was it over here? Oops. Yeah, there it is. Okay, that doesn't work. I mean, it works, but I can't. I need to learn how to use this thing better. I can't, with my current settings, I can't just put my finger or my stylus on it and delete it. I have to go through settings, I guess. But I don't want to delete my Verizon. What was I looking for, by the way? Okay, apps. Magnifier, messages, apps, OneDrive, Samsung, calendar, camera, clock, contacts, Galaxy Store, gallery, game launcher, Netflix, phone. Okay, I do not see the app for, I probably wouldn't recognize it. How long have I been talking? Only 13 minutes. Oh, let's see. Did we go to CNN? Sometimes it seems like a world gone mad. I guess for me it was like when Truman, shows you how old I am, when Trump got elected. And everything since then. This bank gunman, if I believe correct, I think he was an employee. Let's see. Republican governor asked Tennessee lawmakers to pass additional gun control measures. What? That must be a misprint. A Republican governor? Unless it's something, additional gun control measures to prevent people from passing gun control measures or something. It says here, as lawmakers are touched by gun violence, some change their minds on gun control. Let's see, watch SWAT team raid Louisville gunman's home. But if they're raiding some of these people that have guns here in the United States, they better bring a 18-wheeler truck to haul the stuff away. I mean, there's some people that have that many guns. It's unbelievable, especially since some of them are so expensive. I think my Smith & Wesson Auto 40 caliber, I think it was $500 or $600 for it. We're talking handgun. I think that's what it was. That was one weapon. I had a friend that I worked with, a security officer at a hospital, and he collected guns. And you would not believe the number that he had. It was unbelievable. And those things went up in value. The guns went up in value more than stocks or bonds or I think gold. Actually, you know, the truth. He was, I worked with him at Trinity Lutheran Hospital, and then he'd been there a long time, but I think anyway, he went to Research Medical Center where I moved later, but he had told me and others that he was going to retire at age 50. And of course I knew that he wasn't going to, I knew he would never retire, but that's what he was saying. He would retire at age 50. And Lloyd Akins was his name. And he collected pennies and guns and what else? Anyway, he said he was going to retire at age 50. So he left Trinity, I guess because of me. And he went to research. And even though he had problems with me, he shouldn't have, but even though he did, he was supervisor of the midnight shift, and on the midnight shift, the hospital's locked up, and they at the emergency room entrance, that's where 2 or 3 security officers hopefully one would be patrolling or something, but that's where they hung out at night, and he smoked a pipe and stuff. And anyway, I came into work one day and somebody had put up no smoking signs throughout the hospital. And when I went in, timed in and everything, I went to the director of security and I said, "Did you put a whole bunch of?" He said, "Yeah, he did it. He liked to do stuff like that. He liked to do stuff like that because I've talked about him before." So anyway, when Lloyd Akins came in on the midnight shift, that night, I guess it was, he said something like, "You put those signs, to me. You put those. I said, "No, Mr. Ross did it, the director. You did, No, you did it." I said, "No, Lloyd, I don't lie. I'm telling you, he put them up." I said, "If he had told me to put them up, I would have gone and put them up wherever he wanted them to go up. But he did it himself." "Oh, he didn't." And, the director of security at some point told him too, "No, Jim didn't do it. I did it." And he didn't. And it was like months later or whatever, 3 of the supervisors were upset with me. I was a supervisor, the 3 of them were upset with me, blaming me for everything. And so the director of security, had a meeting with all 4 of us while the other security officers were waiting next door for us to go in there for not a monthly, but every 2 or 3 months. there would be a meeting of the security officers to talk about issues and stuff. And so anyway, Lloyd Akins and the other two supervisors were there, and me. And Mr. Ross, they were complaining about me, and that's what the meeting was about. And Lloyd Akins brought up, the no smoking signs. And Mr. Ross, I told you, Jim had nothing to do with it. I put them up. And Lloyd Akins arguing back with him. And then they went through their other list of complaints about me. And Mr. Ross was, no, this type of stuff. And I didn't think the director of security was handling it correctly either, because I would have handled it in a different way. So anyway, on the thing of every time the director of security left, which was true. Now this was true. Every time that he was going to be on vacation or going to a convention someplace, he even went and paid for him. He paid for himself. The hospital paid for him to go a couple places. And he paid his own money to go to someplace in Tokyo or China or I don't know where to attend a international thing of security directors or something. And yes, every time he did, he always put me, in charge, taking his place until he came back. And that was true. So anyway, the guys, or the other security officers, that was one of the things. I forget the other things they were going crazy about. They brought that up. And I said, Mr. Ross, why don't you just do this? Rotate it between the supervisors. And, that way we'll all take a turn being, Now, I thought I was better qualified to be, somebody, well, you can see from where these other guys were. But still, I said, why don't you do that? So then, anyway, the meeting broke up, and the other three were pissed, even though. So anyway, then as the director of security is leaving about 3 or 4 p.m. or whatever, I'm out standing by the emergency room entrance outside, and Mr. Ross comes over and said, okay, Jim, you'll be in charge because I'm going to be gone for a couple of days or something like that. And I said, Mr. Ross, we just had this meeting with people up there screaming and hollering and carrying on. And we agreed, that you were going to rotate it. So, why don't you rotate it and, leave me out of this thing for a while. And he said, oh, okay, well, tell Lloyd Akins when he comes in then that he's going to be, that I'm going to be gone and that he'll be in charge or whatever. And I said, Mr. Ross, I think it would be better if you would call him and tell him that. I think there'd be a problem if I passed it on to him. And he said, okay. So anyway, Lloyd came in, to start his midnight shift at the end of my shift, He came in and I was there, out there. And then there was a call for him, So he went in and then he came out and he said, Mr. Ross says I'm in charge, for that. I said, oh, good, Well, some asshole. I did when I talked to Lloyd, when he came in that night, and whatever. Well, when he came in that night, and then he got the call. When I had talked to Mr. Ross, I didn't see anybody around, but there must have been somebody with good hearing that was over there or over whatever. Because Lloyd Akins, the next day when I saw Lloyd, he said, I'm not a dog. I mean, he was ballistic. I'm not a dog. I heard that Mr. Ross told you were in charge, and you told him to put me in charge or whatever. And he just went ballistic over that. And I really, I try to do things the right way for everybody. And I'm not somebody that and I never wanted to be supervisor. And I think I talked about that. And there was several things that came up over the years, God damn. And anyway, oh yeah. Anyway, when Lloyd finally he left, he worked there for years, several years, quite a few years. And when I came after a few years of me, he moved and went to a different hospital. Anyway, he moved out there, and at that he didn't have a car. He didn't drive a car. I don't know if there's a reason, but he lived like by Trinity. He lived real close down the street block, and so he could walk to work. And when he went to the next hospital, Research Medical Center, they had townhouses, and they had a bunch of, it was like a campus. In fact, it was a campus because they had a nursing school that, for RNs, and that made it to the camp, made it, and so it was subject to the reporting of, had to be reported to the FBI or whatever for statistics of crimes and that type of stuff. But anyway, back to anyway, when Lloyd moved to the other hospital, Research, he got an apartment there, a nice apartment there, and it was a much better neighborhood. Well, that time actually it wasn't a better neighborhood. Crime had moved. It looked like crime was following me. The worst, at the first hospital I worked at, that was the worst. Well, we had out of 10 security officers, 2 shot in the line of duty, about a year apart, 1 killed. But John Galegas managed to shoot the guy that shot him. But anyway, Lloyd got a nice apartment there at the Research Medical Center. And he called me. Like I said, he saved pennies, And he called me and he said, "Jim, could you do me a favor?" And he said, "I've got a bunch of pennies, and I want to take them to the bank across the street, right from the hospital, right across the street." And he said, "Would you help me take them over there?" And I said, "Sure." So I went by, and he needed a car to put them in. I forget how much money it came to, but he wrapped these in wrappers. Of course, he didn't have much of a life, but God damn. So I went over, had a Volkswagen Rabbit. We put him in there, and my Rabbit went down and drove across the street, carried him in, and they said, no, we can't, they had to be out of the wrapper, so they had to unwrap them, all that work that he'd done, and dumped them into their thing. And I forget how many hundreds of dollars it was. And then he said, "Oh, okay." And I said, "Lloyd, is everything okay?" Because he acted funny. And he said, "I thought I had more than I thought I had such and such." And I said, "Well, tell him, no. I said, "Tell him if you know." He said, no. I said, "Okay." So I drove him back over there to his apartment. And a few days later, I don't think it was the next day, a few days later, he called, said, "Jim, could you do me a favor?" He says, "I found pennies that were behind the sofa. That's the extra." That was the money that, had been several $100s worth. I'm thinking $250 or something. And he said, and I said, "Okay, I'll come over and take you over there again." And I did. And anyway, the next thing I really knew about Lloyd was, well, I just thought of something I'd kind of forgotten about. Anyway, he was working at Research Medical Center, and going through the garage in a Cushman scooter. It varied there because I worked there for 5 years, and then I was still working for him. I went to another hospital that was connected. And anyway, Cushman scooter. So a car ran into him in the garage. You had to be really careful of that. Or he ran into a car, and he went to the director of security. Said, I had an accident with the vehicle. Here's my badge. I'm quitting or whatever. And you don't have to quit. You quit. Well, I ran into a. And when I heard about, of course, I didn't say anything to anybody. I didn't say anything to anybody except to myself. And knowing Lloyd too, and the way he was, I'd have just taken, if I'd have been the director of security there or whatever, and he pulled that, that stuff, I would have just taken a badge and said, okay, there's the door. I liked Lloyd in a way, and I got along with him, and I didn't screw with him, and he screwed with me a few times, more than a few times. Now the time that at Trinity that I messed up, and I tried not to mess up, when I went to work at Trinity at 9 o'clock, that was later than that, 10 o'clock at night I guess, maybe it was 9, automatically alarms were turned on for exits that were not normal exits. And it would ring into the switchboard, and the switchboard would call. And when the switchboard would call, I didn't have to deal with that too much because I was day shift supervisor. No, at first I ended up second shift supervisor for years, and I went to the day shift and not as a supervisor. And then I ended up being supervisor of the day shift eventually. But anyway, the switchboard operator was, they had these, a light would light up and beep and light up. And so the operator would call on the radio, I forget what let's say 1013 northwest door on the southeast tunnel of the such and it was things like that. And I thought, God, and I had, like when we had that little bit of an overlap with Lloyd or whatever, because he was coming on duty, and that's when the things were on like all night, and had been for years. And I said, Lloyd, which exit is that? He said, I don't know. And he'd been working a midnight shift for years and years, because it was just so confusing. So anyway, one of the things, voluntarily on my own, that stuff that I told the director of security, I said, when I was working day shift supervisor, Mr. Ross, this such and such, and I explained it with the alarms, I said, is it okay if I make sense of this so everybody knows when the operator calls exactly what exit it is? And he said, fine, and I did that. So on the such and such, like the front of the hospital or whatever, the first exit was 10. The next exit that was still on the ground floor was 11. Actually, there wasn't any 11, I don't think. But and then, of course, the first floor on this corner, wherever would be 20, the next would be 21, 22, and that was it. So we set it up. And then that night, I was there, and Lloyd came in, and Lloyd came in, so we had about an hour overlap or less, I think. And the operator called, number 10 door alarm, and then I thought, oh crap. I didn't, I was thinking, oh shit, because I knew he was going to go ballistic, and he did, and I don't blame him, because, I just didn't think of that thing. I would have done, if I'd have been thinking, I just messed up on that. And I said, Lloyd, and then he just, you son of a bitch, and you're always trying to change things, and blah, 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 and he just raised hell. And he should have. He finally, after about a week, he started talking to me again. Oh, anyway, the story I was getting at was Lloyd I'd mentioned in the beginning of this, that Lloyd had said he was going to retire at age 50. I knew that he wouldn't. But anyway, so he was working at Research Medical Center Security. And it was his 50th birthday. And the security officers over there, I guess they didn't know him very well. So I'm sort of teasing on that. Actually, Lloyd, when Matt was, I think he was working at Trinity then. I invited him to come to, my house, or my wife and my house and my kids, and for dinner and everything. And I went and picked him up, drove him out there. He might have been working at Research then, I can't remember. And, took him back and everything, and he bounced one of my kids on his knees and everything like that. He had a nice time. He didn't get out much. He had a little bit of trouble with people, I think. But anyway, okay. So I was glad to see that he had some friends at, Research. And they picked him up to take him. They were going fishing, and he was excited because he didn't get out much. And it was really nice of them to, I wouldn't take anybody fishing because I wouldn't go fishing. I wouldn't take anybody to a sporting event because I didn't go to a sporting event. I had 4 kids, and a wife. God help me. But they picked him up, and then they said, "Lloyd, what's wrong?" And he said, "I'm just having some chest pain." And they said, "Let us take you over to ER." And he said, No, let's go fishing. And they said, "No, Lloyd, we're taking you over to ER." They took him over, pulled up, took him in, and they went and parked their car. And by the time they got inside, he wasn't in the emergency room. He was in a cardiac unit immediately. They must have hooked him up, and they must have, it must have been really bad. And so when the security officers got up to whatever cardiac unit it was, cardiac intensive care, whatever it was, he was dead. And when they did the autopsy, he'd never missed a day's work, ever. At Trinity, for years, he worked there. And he never missed a day's work. But his heart indicated he'd had a bunch of heart attacks, and he never missed a day's work. So, when I was a Raymore Reserve officer, there was, this is after he was working at Research. There was a special event that came up or whatever, and the director or the chief of police, we all had an assignment. And the assignment that I had was undercover, not in uniform. And all I had was at that time, what did I see? I didn't have the 9, I didn't have the 40 caliber. That must have been a 4-inch, I'm not sure which 4-inch, it would have been a 4-inch, 38 revolver. Anyway, I called Lloyd. I'd never seen his gun collection, but I knew he had a bunch. So I called and said, "Lloyd, have you got a smaller, I forget if he said, "Just come on out, come over." He said, "You can pick out what you want, to borrow, So I went over, and he had a massive chest of drawers, a big one. Now, I'm not sure if that was something that was supplied there in the apartments at the hospital, or if that was actually his. I don't know. Probably his. And the drawers were like this deep, and it was long. They were, well, he asked me when I got there, he said, what do you want? And I said, well, what do you got? And then he pulled open this, one drawer filled with handguns. Pulled open another drawer filled with handguns. Filled with handguns. And anyway, I took one that I thought was appropriate for, and returned it to him a few days later or whatever. And anyway, when Lloyd died, his brother, he had mentioned to his brother, I didn't know he had a brother or anything, that, Jim, a security officer there or whatever, he had me out to his house for dinner and everything like that, and mentioned that we were friends. And so his brother called me, I was at work, and said that, he had taken care of, he went and picked up Lloyd's stuff and everything, and there was a few things that Lloyd would, like for me to have, and I thought, wow, maybe I'm getting a handgun, or whatever. And Lloyd's brother came by, seemed real nice, and no gun. A uniform coat, a nice one, but none of the security, I don't know where, I'm not sure where he got it, but it wasn't, a uniform off, it wasn't something that, it was a nice coat. It was, for a badge, and that kind of stuff. And I think his sergeant's insignia, he wasn't, oh, he was a sergeant before, yeah. And so he had, and his brother gave me his insignias and something else, something minor, that was it. So I was a little bit disappointed. I admit. Lloyd, by the way, was shot in the line of duty when he was working at Trinity. When we had the second shooting at Trinity, I've told that story, so I won't go into it again, but when the hospital administrator at St. Joseph Hospital, when he didn't do what I told him he needed to do after the first shooting of the security officer, when the second one happened, I've told you that story. When he pulled in that morning, the hospital administrator, I said, there is, there's can't remember his name now. I should. Wow. Oh. Can't remember. I said, there's his blood on the ground. Now are you going to do something? And the hospital administrator, it was a black neighborhood, by the way, and he was a black hospital administrator, which made total sense. Because of the neighborhood. He was the only hospital administrator, probably the only hospital, even assistant administrator that was black. But anyway, I'm not going to, okay, I'm going to tell me this story again, but okay, just a second. He said, well, maybe we'll get you guys some horses. And they went on inside. Big mistake. Big mistake on his part. Because that was also the doctor's parking lot. Employees, visitors, doctor's parking lot. Every doctor that pulled in, Dr. Piper, every one of them. There's John's blood on the ground. I just talked to the hospital administrator. I told him we needed bulletproof vest, and we needed a gate between this that goes over through the church parking lot, because people that in both shootings, first time it was 2 guys came through from the church parking lot, and yep, and the other time 1, and they all went to see him. And about 45 minutes later, every one of those doctors. Now, some of the doctors said, "How much do bulletproof vests cost?" I said, "I don't know. I don't think Kansas City PD even had bulletproof vests at that time. I don't think. Maybe they did." Anyway, every one of those doctors went to the hospital administrator's office. And after about 45 minutes, the assistant hospital administrator, I didn't really know what a suck-ass was. I didn't know, because I'd worked my life as a welder for years and years, and post office for a little while. And my wife and I had a tropical fish shop for, 4 years and all kind, but I, and a patrol service for about a year or so. My own patrol service. Anyway, the assistant administrator came out, and all those jobs, like when I was welding, I was like underneath railroad cars welding, or inside gigantic trucks, trucks bigger than you can imagine. Unless you watched the 20-team borax commercial on whatever TV show that back was in the early days of when Ronald Reagan was the announcer and commercial or whatever. But anyway, so the assistant, he came out. He was white. "Oh, Jim, by the way, we're going to put a gate across here, and we're going to get you bulletproof vest or whatever." And I said, "Okay." And so I waited. It took a few weeks for the nuns to come up with the money, because they didn't want to spend the money. But I guess they were finally convinced. Maybe some of the doctors might have been saying to the nuns, because the nuns ran the place. I mean, they had a hospital administrator, but the nuns ran the place. Pretty neat. It was actually pretty neat for a situation of hospital security, or for the way I worked too, because there was a nun who was a pharmacist, and she was in charge of the pharmacy. There was an RN in the emergency room. She was a nun also, and an RN, and she was in charge of, and it was easy for me to, just go to them if I needed to get something done. That worked out pretty well. Much better than other places. But anyway, as soon as I waited, because I was afraid I was going to make them do what they said they were going to do. Get the bulletproof vest. And anyway, the only time, we didn't leave that hospital because of the neighborhood, except to go gas up the vehicle, a Cushman scooter, across the street. But I did make one trip away from that hospital, and all those in that 3.5 years, and that was to go to law enforcement equipment company and pick up bulletproof vests and bring them back. They have liners on them, so you can wash the liner, because you can't wash that material as ballistic material, whatever. And so when I brought those back, I knew my name would be, I knew they'd be waiting for an opportunity to, the hospital administrator to get me. And I wasn't going to give them, so I applied at Trinity Lutheran Hospital and got hired. That was interesting. They had an opening, so I went over there to, they had, all the hospitals had tremendous parking problems. Not enough parking. Wow. And I went over, and I almost gave up. I'm glad I didn't. I was getting ready to leave. Fuck this, And then a parking spot opened up for me. I guess God was looking out for me. And I pulled in. I went to Human Resources, and said, I'd like to put an application in, you know. And I see I had a bunch of, you know, previous, remember I had even in my own patrol service. And I'd worked part-time for contract guard agencies, Burns, Pinkerton, Wells Fargo, and others, you know. But anyway, she said, well, you have to have X number of years of experience as a security officer. And I said, I've got it. Oh, well, you have to have 2 years experience as a, what was it, did she say institutional? I don't think it was institutional. It was, in other words, you know, something like hospital security or whatever. I said, I've got more than that. And she said, okay. So she called up to the, I filled out the application. Then she called up, ouch, to the director of security. He came down in the elevator from the 6th floor, and he came over and said, okay, he says, come on up to the office. So then he walks me down. We get on the elevator, and Dr. Maria, one of the doctors who was on the staff at this hospital, you know, at Trinity, and over at St. Joseph Hospital. I knew him, you know. His family owned a store, maybe more than one, that dealt in harnesses and saddles and things for horses, and I guess maybe donkeys, I don't know, that kind of stuff. Real nice guy. So just the three of us on the elevator, you know, and Dr. Maria says, Jim, what are you doing over here? And I said, well, I'm trying to talk Bob Ross here, the director of security, into hiring me. And he looked, Dr. Maria said, you better hire Jim. He's an excellent security officer. You better hire him. And so, well, I didn't know at the time. I had got the job. Then when Mr. Ross, you know, interviewed me or whatever, one of the things Mr. Ross said to me is, you know, well, it's not what you know, it's who you know. Anyway, then he said, well, okay, I'll let you know. I'll call you. I want to check some things, and I'll give you a call. And I said, okay, thank you. I went home, and I told the wife, man, I hope I get this job, because you have your own key to the office. I mean, the security office, you didn't have that at, you know, at the other place. They had one little tiny office at St. Joe Hospital. And, of course, at Trinity, there was an office for the lieutenant and the secretary, and there was an office for the security officers. You know, not an office, but I mean, everything was in there. And then he had an office, you know. And anyway, I told the wife, I said, yeah, everything really I like everything about this. I really hope I get this job. And then I said, because I got a key to the office and all this kind of. And then Mr. Ross called and said, okay, well, you got the job. When can you start? And I said, well, I get to give 2 weeks' notice. So he said, okay. That day, so I gave my 2 weeks' notice. But that day or the next day, or maybe it was a few days later, maybe it was a week later, Lloyd Akins, I was telling you about him, the midnight shift supervisor. He lived down the street. He was coming in at, you know, 10 p.m. or whatever to go, you know, go to work, walking down the sidewalk. And I mean, he was there right next to the hospital property, and a guy comes up with a gun and said, you know, give me your money or something like that. Lloyd was in uniform with a gun. And Lloyd said, I don't think your gun's loaded. And the guy says, oh yeah? Boom, shot him. The bullet was old ammo, I think. It just barely broke Lloyd's, you know, skin or whatever. And then he went down the hill and went to the emergency room, you know, for it. So that was the first time I heard Lloyd Aiken's name. But by the way, at St. Joe Hospital, when I had turned in my resignation, there was a young security officer there, real young. After the first security officer was shot, I went over and took his spot on the second shift for X amount of time, months or whatever. And then I went to the midnight shift. Not as we didn't have any supervisors there, except for the director of security. Then I was on the midnight shift, and then that's when this new security officer got hired in. And oh God, he came in early. You know, he coming in like at 11 o'clock at night, but he wasn't in uniform. He was the only guy that came in who wasn't in uniform. He came in, you know, and then he just went through the hospital, you know, like he was a detective or something, you know. Then he'd go put his uniform on. But anyway, so he comes in and, you know, so, oh my God. And why did I get on this subject? Oh, okay, so then I ended up back on the day shift, and then he ended up on the day shift. And so I'd already turned in my resignation to quit. And gave 2 weeks notice. So anyway, this young security officer, he comes over, oh, Jim, you should stick around. They've got, because they had the plans up for the new hospital in the new in a white neighborhood. And the other neighborhood where where St. Joseph Hospital was, that was a bad neighborhood. And I can say that because I used to live in that neighborhood. That was 31st and Prospect, and I lived about 35th and Prospect, actually 35th and Garfield. 3510 Garfield, Kansas City, Missouri. So anyway, he says, oh, you know, and they were moving way out, you know, moving way out south. And anyway, so this young security officer came, oh, Jim, you really ought to stick around. I said, no, I've turned in my resignation. Oh, they're going to have cameras up. And I said, I'm sure they'll have cameras up. And he said, and they're going to have supervisors. And I said, they may have supervisors. And I said, the only thing is, when you move out there, they're going to take your guns away from you. Well, no, they won't do that. I said, yes, they will. It's in south part of Kansas City, Missouri. Very little crime out there. You'll go out there and you'll all be disarmed. That's not going to happen. I said, yes, it is. So a little bit later, he came back. Oh, I just talked to, you know, the hospital administrator, the black one. And he said, you know, Mr. Dickinson, I think it was. Mr. Dickinson said, they're not going to take our guns away from us. And I said, Mr. Dickinson, he's not going to be the hospital administrator out there. Well, yes, he is. I said, no, he's not. Here, he's an asset. Out there, he'd be a liability. He won't be going out there. Guess what? Yeah, Jim was right again. So, man, there's a category for this. What is it? Not walking and talking. I guess I need to create a new, what do we call these on YouTube? areas or whatever. I need one sitting and talking, I guess. Anyway, I wish I'd have done more but I really couldn't. I was married, and the wife was very possessive, very suspicious. Part of that was her mother. I never cheated on her, and wouldn't even think of it. We had 4 kids and stuff. But her mother, I don't think her mother did it the entire time, but for years, I would, I'd go to work when I was working at the tropical fish shop. I was working at KW Dart Truck Company, KW Kenworth. They had a factory. Next to it was Dart Truck, and we made the trucks, the big ones. I got just a little sample of, a model of one or whatever. I worked in the body shop. We made these gigantic trucks. Anyway, I think that was the end of my... I wish I'd have done... Oh, yeah, that's what I was going to mention. I wish I'd have done more for Lloyd, but it was really difficult with my wife. Although she made a nice meal for him, and she was, But when I worked at Trinity, and when I was, supervisor there, on the day shift, I was in charge of, in addition to the security officers on the day shift, 7, I think it was, parking lot attendants. And 3 of them that I know of on the day shift were gay. And one was a Lutheran minister. And he had a big church, he had a fancy, he was the pastor of a fancy parish, a Lutheran parish in the Chicago area. But he was separated from his wife, and which doesn't make much sense to me, but anyway, about once a year, the bishop or whatever would come from Chicago. Anyway, this Lutheran minister was working as a parking lot attendant, and I'd have to let him, of course, go to meet in the hospital with the bishop, and the bishop, told him, well, he knew it, but it meant, he passed it on to me. Not the bishop didn't pass it on to me, but the parking lot attendant, a really nice guy. And, the bishop told him, I guess each time he came, you have a choice. You can get divorced from your wife, which I didn't know. You can get divorced from your wife and stay, back at your church, but you can't be separated from her. And, he wouldn't do it. Anyway, and he lived about a block or so over, this parking lot attendant about a block or so over. And the neighborhood there was bad too, but not as bad as St. Joseph Hospital, but it was bad too. And we had a doctor shot in the parking lot, a female doctor shot in the parking lot. I was, many, many years later, I was in Florida, and they had that show of where the guy's son was killed or whatever, and then he had a TV show of finding, people who had committed a murder or something like that. Anyway, we had a female doctor killed there. There was a small apartment building. They called it the interns' residence or something, but interns didn't do anymore. And there was nurses, but in this case, I guess it was an intern, but she didn't work at Trinity. She worked at General Hospital or something, or getting her degree or whatever it was. And her boyfriend, she was going back to Yugoslavia or someplace like that as a doctor. You know, she'd gone through all the training in Kansas City, Missouri, became a doctor, but she was going back to Yugoslavia, or no, I guess he was going to Yugoslavia or something. I think she was. Anyway, he wanted her to go with him, and no. And I think it was her going someplace, maybe not Yugoslavia, but can't remember now, been a long time. So he was waiting in a car in the parking lot. That was my day off. I'm not sure what made any difference, but you know, before I left every day, before I left the shift or whatever, like I would go out, you know, and I don't think I usually drove. I would walk around the entire, you know, I walked through that parking lot, in fact, and I would have seen him sitting there, so I probably would have gone over and said, "Sir, can I help you?" or something. Maybe I'd have noticed something. I don't know, maybe he'd have shot me. But I wasn't on that day. And anyway, he waited for her, and she pulled in. He went over and shot her and killed her. And then he took off. I think that's where the Yugoslavia thing came, because I think I remember that they said that, you know, he took off, and I think it was Yugoslavia that he went to. That was his home. Anyway, I was in Florida, God, a whole bunch of years later, To Catch a, was it a show called To Catch a Thief or something, or To Catch a, whatever. And I just happened, I think, flip over to it. Oh, wow, because I didn't normally watch it, you know. And they were talking about, you know, a female doctor shot in the parking lot, and I was thinking, oh, we had, and then I realized that was the case they were talking about. They hadn't found him at that point. I guess they probably never did. Oh, yeah. Back to my story. Anyway, this Lutheran minister who was working as a parking lot attendant, and I was his supervisor. Really nice guy. Anyway, when I left Trinity, when I was fired, and left Trinity, by the way, it was the unemployment agency or whatever that government, which I knew they would. I appealed the thing, even though I didn't intend to go back. I couldn't stand Mr. Ross, the director of security. It had got to, I might have done something. I couldn't stand him anymore. I could not stand him. I liked him, actually. I liked him because he gave me the most fantastic merit reviews. Unbelievable. I loved that. That worked. Two, he knew sort of how to handle me. Like I didn't want to be a supervisor. I hired in there and worked for like 6 months or whatever it was. And then I got called up to the office. I didn't go to the office very often. I was outside in the parking lot with the cars on the day shift and stuff. And I went up there and he had my merit review. They did a 6-month merit review when he first started. Then after that, once a year, a merit review. And you got 0 to 7%, or 0 to 7 was your score or whatever. And there was a percentage point. So if you got 1, of course, I don't think that'd keep you if you got 1, but that'd be 1% in pay increase. So anyway, I got called up to the office. I'd never been called up to the office before. And anyway, he had my merit review, and I thought, God damn, this guy, he loves me. 6.5%. You know, and then everything he said was really great. And so anyway, and I said, thank you very much, you know, and then I signed it and started out, and he said, aren't you going to say, I guess maybe I didn't say thank you or something, I don't know. Anyway, I signed it and said, okay. And he said, I forget what he said, do you like the, and I said, yeah, that's a good merit review, thank you very much. And then after that, every merit review I got was 7%, or 7, the highest you could get, every one. And that's one of the reasons, well, not the only reason, well, it really wasn't needed, but when I got fired, and I appealed it, just to appeal it, and I already had a job, but, you know, I appealed it anyway. And so I went to the thing, and I didn't think they'd actually send anybody, so I show up at the unemployment office, and I'm there, and it was after, a few minutes after, you know, and the guy said, well, nobody showed up from the hospital. And I said, I don't think anybody will come out. And he said, well, we'll wait a little bit. And then here came the Director of Human Resources, who was unbelievably good. And everything he handled, it was everything. Of course, he had to deal with, I mean, he was Director of Human Resources, but Mr. Ross, the Director of Security, he was something else. You know, the Director of Human Resources at the time, no, you can't, to him, you know, tell the, you can't do that. And Mr. Ross would go ahead and do it. So anyway, he showed up. And man, that was great. The way the system worked out, just the way it was set up. I'm not saying it was fair. I think it probably was fair. But it was, there were only 3 of us there. You know, the arbitrator or whatever it was. Well, he wasn't an arbitrator exactly. You know, whoever came from the hospital and me. And so he was under oath. I mean, I told the truth all the time, all my life. And so I got to ask him questions. It was like Perry Mason or whatever. It was unbelievable. I mean, you know, because the whole situation was, you know, I was fired for opposing racism, which was really bad in the security department. And of course, they didn't mention that. They didn't say we fired him because of that. They said that they fired me because I objected to a party being held for the director of security. Well, the hospital declared supervisor's appreciation day, and encouraged all the employees to do something for their boss. You know, have a little party, do something like that. And so, okay, so I was supervisor of the day shift, and all the security officers hated the director of security, and some of them made fun behind his back. And they did, you know, and I didn't do that. You know, I did grievances against him, you know, through the procedure, but I didn't pull any, you know, when he was wrong, he was wrong. Unfortunately, some of those times when he went absolutely ballistic, I was joking. But when he went ballistic, I didn't say, Mr. Ross, I was just joking. I didn't do that. When he went ballistic, then okay, let it go, you know, and he lost every one of the grievances that I did, he lost. Administration ripped into him, you know, big time. But anyway, when it went to the arbitration, of course, I won. I already had a job, you know. I think at that point I was manager trainee at Radio Shack, you know. I think. Can't remember. Oh, no, okay, that's what I was. Oh, okay. So, this Lutheran minister, real nice guy, and I'd been fired from Trinity, and by the way, when I got fired from Trinity, you're not going to believe this, but people won't believe it. I don't lie. As soon as I got fired, I went home. Well, first I went to the federal building in Kansas City, Kansas, which was a fucking mistake. But I knew that when I filed a federal, whatever what the category was, once that's filed against a company, it stays with the record. I mean, which I did, even if I did not win the thing, it stays in the company. If anybody looks up the company, you know, it'll show every complaint that they've had filed against them. And I knew my problem was I was a supervisor, and supervisors don't count. This guy, a lawyer, and I hadn't had breakfast, I don't think, because I knew I was going to get fired that morning. So I brought all my paperwork and everything with me. In fact, you know, I came into work that day, Monday, and I could have stopped myself from, I mean, I could have, all I had to do was just contact the hospital administrator or something else, and they would have taken care of it. In fact, they had told him he couldn't fire me, it turns out, which I knew that they would have, you know, because he went screaming to them. And they told him, no, you can't fire Jim. If he's a supervisor, if you wanted, you know, of course I had stopped wearing my insignia as supervisor. I mean, you know, because, but anyway, this Lutheran minister, parking lot attendant, he called me one time at home and said, oh, Jim, I'm going to be out your way. He didn't have a car, by the way. Going to be out your way and preaching on Sunday at such and such, you know, I forget what it was, Lutheran church. And I talked to him a little bit and got off the phone. I think that at that point my wife and I were having problems. And that's all she would have needed. She'd have said that I abandoned her to go to, you know, I mean, it would have been, I forget what it was, exactly how it was, but I got off the phone. I thought, you know, I should have told him I'd come over and pick him up and take him, you know, take him to the church, and I'd sit there for the thing. And I mean, I didn't go to church or anything, but I was thinking that's what I should have done. And it was a short time after that. But what happened is that place that he lived, you know, right a couple blocks over from the hospital there, I'd never been in the building or anything, but all, you know, cockroach and fib building, and he had been a Lutheran minister with, I'm sure he had that him and his wife had a nice place. You know, I mean, I forget, I don't know, I know I've driven through Chicago or came through on a train or something, you know, but this was in a rich part of, did you hear him talk about, they mentioned, and so he could have gone there. But anyway, his family or friends or somebody like that decided to drop in on him. They were coming through Kansas City or whatever. And they decided to surprise him. And so they popped in on him. So the next day, he didn't come into work. And he'd never missed a day's work. And they sent a security over, either a security or a parking lot attendant, I forget which. Probably a security officer. It was on block, like 1 block over. To go over and check on him, and he'd committed suicide.
Yes, thank you very much.
So that's one of my regrets, you know, that I didn't go and pick him up and take him to the service and maybe talk to him a little bit or something. Although that's before his family or friends decided to visit him. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Yeah, nah, that's enough.